Hey everyone, I'm Jay Shear, and you've joined Business Minds Coffee Chat. This is where remarkable people gather to share insights, lift and inspire, and deliver actionable content. You've likely heard the saying, pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. Well, some of the most valuable lessons in life are learned through pain. How we choose to respond is what truly matters. On this episode, we're going to be talking about embracing pain to avoid suffering, reframing our narrative, self-awareness, intentionality, and vulnerability. Our guest is a husband and father, a human behavior and performance coach, speaker, business strategist, and philanthropic leader who helps people make their best even greater. He survived a life-changing accident at the age of 7, built a $15 million insurance business in less than 10 years, and recently exited that business to focus full-time on helping individuals and companies break beyond their normal to achieve their full potential and the success in life and business they've always wanted. Please welcome the owner and president of the Bogert Companies and the man who is on a mission to impact 1 billion people to experience more joy, freedom, fulfillment, and less suffering, Brian Bogert. Brian, welcome.
Jay, it is an absolute pleasure to be with you. And man, that's got to be one of the best introductions I've ever heard. I like where you modified it, and that was great. You make me sound way cooler than I really am.
Well, thank you. And you are super cool. So I'm very much looking forward to jumping into this conversation. And I've got to tell you, I have thoroughly enjoyed researching you and learning more about you. So I'm very excited and very grateful to have you here today. So thank you.
Yep.
So Brian, let's start, if we could, with a thumbnail sketch of your journey. And what I'd like to focus on, you have a very interesting story. I'd like to focus on what led you to living your true purpose.
That's a great question. And I think that it was one of those things. I'm not a big believer that we necessarily determine our purpose. I think our purpose finds us. And so a lot of where I'm at in my place in life at the moment, where I'm focused, what my purpose has been since I wrote it down for the first time 6 or 7 years ago, my purpose is to provide. Now that means multiple different things. But it became very, very clear to me that one of the things I've done for a lot of my life, probably because of my unique story, is that I'm in a position to provide perspective, motivation, and direction to a lot of those people around me. I also have found myself through a variety of leadership roles, philanthropically, in business, in the community, you name it, where I'm providing opportunity, right, for those that might be less fortunate, and leadership and those types of things. So when I really look at provide, there's 4 or 5 different buckets that I view myself providing in, but that all attributes towards my direction on impacting 1 billion lives. Right? If I can bring these things into the world, then that's what happens. So I think that my purpose found me, as is the case with all of us. I was born with a certain set of gifts, and then my life journey took me down a path that we'll unpack, I'm sure, through portions of our conversation. But the further in that path I got, the more clear it became that the gifts were there for a reason. And those experiences that I got were for the perspective, were for me to absorb and experience pain, were for me to understand human connection, empathy, vulnerability, authenticity, awareness, and intentionality. Because in every section of my journey, I learned lessons. And the fortunate part about me is early in my life, I realized that we are only as good as the lessons we can extract from our stories. Right? We're only as good as the lessons we can extract from those that are around us and the experiences that we have in our lives. And all of those things contributed to what I believe is my purpose and what I've committed my life to at this point.
Well said. And it's interesting the way that you frame purpose finding us versus us finding our purpose. So if you look back, how or has your purpose changed over the last several years, and how would you coach and advise someone who wants to find their purpose? If you say that purpose finds us and someone was sitting across from you right now in a coaching session, what would you say to them?
Yeah. So to answer the first part of your question, it has not changed since the first time I wrote it down. But I do believe that purposes can change. They can evolve, they can grow, that can refine. And so mine, I'll correct that. Mine did change because it used to say, I am a provider, right? And now I believe my purpose is to provide. So that shift tense change probably happened 3 or 4 years ago. And it was to take me out of a reverse engineered thought process on the things that I've done by being a provider and puts it into a future focused and objective perspective around I provide. Mm-hmm. So that's the only change mine has had since I wrote it down for the first time. It's evolved and changed in different periods where I didn't write it down in different places and I maybe thought it was something different. To answer your second question, what's fascinating is I think that more people know what their purpose isn't than know what it is. And so when I start working with clients, that's typically one of the first places I start, is at least around the questions around what is your purpose and what is your legacy. And often people haven't really contemplated that. In fact, in all the individuals that I've coached, there's only been a fraction who come in with answers to those questions. And most of them we end up refining over a period of going on an intrinsic journey and unpacking a lot of clarity. So to answer the question on how do we find it, right? How do I help people find it? I think it's not a coincidence that the basic premise of a lot of my coaching is based in the foundation around awareness and intentionality, right? What we are unaware of, we cannot be intentional with. We can't influence, we can't control. And the reality of it is if we look at what awareness is and some of the statistics based on studies, our minds process 11 million bits of information per second, but we're only consciously aware of about 40. And so what that means is that we're largely led by the unconscious, right? So until we go through a systematic approach of moving the unconscious to the conscious, the unaware to the aware, it's going to feel like life is happening to us, like it's fate, like we have no ability to control or influence our destiny, our track, our impact. And so what I always start with is awareness. And so when I work with people to find their purpose, right, I am never going to put words in somebody's mouth. And I also am very, very clear that when someone defines what their purpose is, some people think that they need to write it down. It needs to sound eloquent. It needs to be this like big, profound thing. The reality of it is what it has to do is it has to resonate within your body and within your soul and within your mind for words that matter to you and no one else. So purpose, I think, is within ourselves, and that's where it starts. And so, often I'll find that people want to have an impact. They want to leave the world in a better place. They want to be the leader of their family. They want to grow and establish a business that's going to have a ripple effect in the world, right? And so sometimes what's funny is although I start with that question, the purpose doesn't become clear until the end of our work together. Because once we get really, really clear on who we are, the things we want to accomplish, and we build a systematic life of alignment where it becomes self-regulating, sometimes just through that process, our purpose exposes itself. And I've worked with individuals that, we'll write something down and I'll work with them for 9 or 12 months. And by the end of that 9 or 12 months, what they originally wrote down, they end up changing because the words don't resonate like I told you they should, right? So for me, when I say I will provide, that resonates deeply. I know what that means in those 4 different buckets that I told you about. And so it's very, very directionally accurate for me. And I run almost everything through that lens when I'm making decisions on, is this putting me in a position to actually fulfill my purpose? And so I do the same thing with my clients is we test it, right? So if they write something down, we test it against the model. Where does this align in your life? And what are the actions, activities, thoughts, emotions, behaviors that you're doing to move yourself towards serving that purpose? And so I wish I could tell you there's like a really clear, succinct way to say, yep, here's how you find your purpose, Jay. But the reality of it is a little bit of trial and error, but it starts with awareness and then being very, very intentional as you move forward to make sure that, again, it's in alignment.
Well, so there's a couple of things that you've said, actually more than a couple, but that are incredibly powerful. And one of those is the shift, the subtle shift that you made in your own purpose. Mm-hmm. And if you think about it, it was a very small change, right? But that small change made a massive difference. And and makes the angle so much wider, right? Such a much larger ability to serve at a high level. So that was really interesting. And
Thank you.
The other piece to that, does it surprise you when you have clients that come in that have no idea what their purpose is? Because you mentioned that you have some, maybe a percentage of your clients that have written something down, right? And it may change over that 9 to 12 month period, but the number of people that don't have that defined, is that surprising to you at all?
It did when I first got into coaching. To be perfectly honest, like it really surprised me. At this point, 5.5 years of doing this, I've coached enough people that, like I said, the majority, I think, know what it's not versus know what it is. And so it doesn't surprise me anymore because I think it's actually more common, because most people, and this is no bash on anybody, I didn't think a whole lot about it until 7-ish years ago when I started to go down this path. But I don't think most people think like that, right? And I think a lot of that is because the world kind of layers on over the course of our lives who we should be, right? The things we should do, the roles we should play, the businesses we should be in. And so I think a lot of people end up kind of just going down that path of what the world has told them they should be, versus taking a step back and saying, who am I? And how do I make sure that who I really am at the core is what the world sees? If we start with the who, then the what will be a manifestation of the who. But the majority of the time, people start with the what, and then they either lose the who or they redefine the who over time, which loses power in both cases. But when we start with the who, that's when magic happens, right? That's when we really have the ability to have exponential growth, joy, freedom, and fulfillment, and reach our highest levels of potential and purpose in life. That's my belief, and it's proven itself out in the time that I've applied these philosophies to myself as well as in the folks that I coach.
That is incredibly powerful. And I want to talk about the self-discovery process that you personally have been on. And it might even be a journey that continues today. I certainly know it is for me. But so much of what you talk about today and what you do in your coaching business, I try to look back and think about, okay, so where did those connections come from, right? For myself, what were the lessons that I had to learn in life? What's the journey that I've been on that has enabled me the ability to have these kinds of conversations and bring these learnings to my clients to help them reach their full potential? So can you unpack a little bit about your own self-discovery and your journey?
Yeah, so I think it's really important probably to start with one of the biggest parts of my story, because that's really where the journey, I think, of unpacking this began. So I want everybody listening just for a second, and Jay, if you say you've done extensive research on me, you've probably heard this story a time or two. But I want everybody to just close their eyes for 1 second. And I want them to imagine walking out of a store after a successful shopping trip and turning their head and seeing a truck barreling 40 miles an hour right at them with no time to react. That's where this portion of my story begins. My mom, my brother, and I had gone to our local Walmart to get a 1-inch paintbrush. And as we were headed back to the car, right, I've always had an excitement, vigor for life, a lot of energy. And so it wasn't a surprise to my mom that I was 3 or 4 feet ahead of them, got to the car first and waited there for her to catch up and unlock the door so we could get home and put that paintbrush to use. Well, as I'm standing there, a truck pulls up in front of the store. The driver and the middle passenger get out, and the passenger all the way to the right feels the truck moving backwards. So he did what any one of us would do, and he moved over to put his foot on the brake, but instead he hit the gas. Combination of shock and force threw him up onto the dashboard, up onto the steering wheel, and before you know it, he was catapulting 40 miles an hour right at us. Now, we were parked in an end spot, so he went up and over the median, went up and over the tree in the median, hit our car. We think I was holding onto the handle, and it threw me to the ground, ran over me diagonally, tore my spleen, left a tire track scar on my stomach, and continued on to completely sever my left arm from my body. So there we are I'm laying in the parking lot in the asphalt in the middle of August on a 115-degree day. My mom and brother just watched the entire thing, but so did my guardian angel, because a nurse walked out of the store right when this happened. She saw the life and limb scenario in front of her, and she ran immediately into action. She stopped the bleeding on my arm, and she instructed some innocent bystanders to run inside, grab a cooler, throw my arm on ice within minutes. Had she not done one or both of those things, I either wouldn't be here with you today, or I would be here with you today, but with no arm. She saved my life, and she was the first reason that I'm here today with an arm. Right now, there's a whole lot more to that story, and I'm going to compress it. But the reality of it is this wasn't like a 1 or 2 surgery type of recovery. This was a 24 surgery ordeal. This was years of physical and occupational therapy, tons of rehab. And I'm sure that a lot of our listeners weren't expecting it to go there today. But as I've talked about before, and as you and I really have chatted about already, and the question that you prompted is, where did the journey begin, right? What I've learned in all my time of doing this is that what is important is that we pause and become aware of the lessons we can extract from those stories, and then become intentional with how do we apply them in our lives. And we all have the ability to do that. So that's where this question is prompting us. There's 2 primary lessons that I learned as a result of this. The first is I learned not to get stuck by why this had happened to me or what had happened to me, but instead get moved by what I could do with it. And the second, I didn't realize this until far later in life, because I spent a lot of those post-accident years in legitimately a fog. I mean, there's a whole lot about my memory that has blocked out things at this point, and I was just along for the ride to try to recover and survive. But my parents were not. You see, my parents looked at the fact that the idea of their son growing up without the use of his arm was going to be a source of great suffering for them. And so they willed themselves day in and day out to do what was necessary, what was uncomfortable, all of the hard work to really focus on my recovery, to strengthen and heal me. To my benefit, they sacrificed. And so what I realized, right, is this is the philosophy, and also one of my guiding principles in life at this point, is I learned to embrace pain to avoid suffering. And what you talked about in my intro, right? I mean, the reality of it is this is the same concept that I've used to not only overcome this unique injury, but also how my business partners and I built our last business to 15 million within the span of a decade. And now how I flipped it on its head, and I've now helped hundreds of individuals and organizations just like you become more aware, more intentional in who they already are, their most authentic selves. Because like I said, that's when the door begins to crack to perspective, motivation, and direction. And that's when magic starts to happen. Yeah. So that is the first part of the story. And I'll pause because I know we'll ask some questions. But again, there are other pieces to my evolution. But that was one of the first moments, because as I'm sitting there in the ICU bed, feeling sorry for myself, and then I see families coming up to us who are saying, we're so sorry, what can we do to help you? And then we find out that their kid is laying in a bed next to me with a terminal illness and they don't know if they're going to live for another month. That's perspective that smacked me right in the face. And I remember that feeling as a 7-year-old sitting there saying, wow, why me? But guess what? I'm going to be alive. I didn't know if I'd have my arm at that point still, even though the recovery had started to begin, but I knew I was going to live. And the kid next to me didn't. That's a game changer in terms of perspective when you're a 7-year-old.
Incredible. So the guardian angel that you mentioned, I think about that part of the story, and also the amazing gift that you were given with your parents and their love and their care. Yeah. That guardian angel and what your parents provided for you, do you view that now as you look back? Is that one of the primary indicators as to why, or the impetus behind why you want to provide?
So I've never thought about it directly connected to any one of the three of them in that way, but yes, it's a piece of it. I think the reality of it is a lot of people have asked me for years why I do the things that I do in the community, why I'm committing my life to helping other people, why all these things. And the reality of it is I feel I was given a set of gifts early in life, and I view this accident and injury as a gift because perspective points us at what's important. And so when I really reflect on my life and the impact of this experience and those three people, amongst others that were a part of the recovery, I'm blessed. I'm lucky. I'm here. I live a happy, healthy, and productive life. And so I've been given something that's great. And to quote the Spider-Man movie, right? To whom much is given, much is expected.
Yes.
When I'm given the gifts that I have early in life, and I'm now in a position to elevate and empower other people through my story, through my pain, through my struggles. If I deny that calling, then I'm doing an injustice to myself, and I'm doing an injustice to all the people in my life. I will tell you that my parents certainly were a critical role. My guardian angel certainly was a critical role, because had any one of those three people not been a part of my life, right? Like, had she not saved my life, I wouldn't be in this position. Had my parents not sacrificed all that they had. And the thing is what they did with me is like a microcosm of what they do every single day. My parents help so many people. They are the strength. They are the rock. They help people emotionally, financially, with errands. You name it. My parents would take their shirts off their backs to help someone that's in their lives, or even if they don't know them, if they need help. And I've witnessed that my entire life. Right now, they don't do it in the same philanthropic perspective that I maybe have channeled my efforts into, or what have you, but they do it on a one-to-one, human-to-human perspective. Like, they are constantly looking for how can they lighten the burden for other people, and how can they have an impact in those people's lives by the way they live and show up every day. And so, when I say I didn't tie it to this accident and that experience of recovery, it's because to me, that almost pales in comparison to the way they live every day. So, but yeah, that my parents, of course, had a huge impact on that.
Yeah, what amazing role models. That's incredible. I mean, as you're describing that level of care and attention and giving, right, and giving to others, it just, number one, it brings tears to my eyes a bit, because I think about my own parents and how they serve, but it also it gives me chills when I think about it, because we all have that ability, right?
Yeah,
It's within us. And I also want to go back, and I know you're going to unpack more of this, but so you experienced a tremendous amount of physical pain.
Yeah.
And physical rehab that you went through. I want to talk about the mental aspect of this for a moment, because you have been able to reframe the story, and you're able to turn it around on its head and look at this as a gift, right? This is a something that you have been given, that you can now use as a means to be able to serve others. Now, that doesn't just happen. That takes work. So I'm curious, your parents obviously were part of this, but how else were you able to work through the psychological side and get to a place where you are today, where you have completely changed the perspective and you're looking at it through an amazing set of optics?
Thank you. You're right. It's taken a lot of work. So thank you for saying that one, and thank you for acknowledging that too. That's huge. And it does mean a lot, because I know the work I've put into it. But I'll tell you that, when you're 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, right? Like, there's an element of, this is just what happens. Like, the cards you're dealt, right? You're kind of in it and living in it, and not necessarily able to pull yourself out of it. And so there was a huge element of focus applied to mental toughness, because I had to endure the pain physically, emotionally, right? I had to figure out how to move forward. And all of those years of therapy and recovery, and knowing that I was going through this and a lot of my friends weren't, right, was something that was real to me. But I will tell you that I also became the center of attention in a way that I didn't really like in that period of my life, right? Because first of all, a lot of people didn't believe the story when I was in a sling and I would tell them I was run over. They'd be like, yeah, right, you fell off a jungle gym and broke your arm. And then second, right, people would just assume what I was not capable of. And that really irked me, right? That like really bothered me, because when they looked at me, a lot of times I could very, vividly see in someone's eyes that they viewed me and felt sorry for me. They viewed me as a victim. They viewed me as someone who wasn't going to be capable of doing a whole lot. And so there was an element of the mental toughness that was just ingrained by the work ethic that my parents instilled in me and who I was. But there was also an external factor that I was not going to be defined by other people's terms.
Brian,
like that bothered me.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I have to ask, did you understand that at the time?
I did understand that piece.
You did?
I didn't understand the impact of that until later, and I'm going to get there. Okay. But yes, I absolutely understood that piece. And because of that, I got really good at leaning into one of my natural gifts, which is to read people. But this like put it on steroids because I didn't want to be the center of attention. I didn't want to be the victim. And so I found ways to really understand group dynamics, people, how they were going to approach me, what the little micro expressions on their face meant when they looked at me or what they expressed. I got to know that stuff really, really well. And what translated from that was I decided at that moment that I wasn't going to be defined that way. And I was going to break beyond boundaries and live by my limits, no limits. And I'm going to do a whole lot that people think I can't do. And so that's what really fueled that next phase, which, you know, in the moment didn't feel like a chip on my shoulder. Looking back, it absolutely was, right? In the moment, it was like, this is how I'm going to live my life. But looking back on it, what really happened was I created an external narrative to protect myself.
Interesting.
And my actions translated as a result of that, right? So my narrative was, I'm good, I'm tough, I'm strong, I don't need anybody's help, I can do anything I set my mind to. And I believed that for a long time, and I proved that out for a long time. But that only gets you so far, right? Like mindset and mental toughness is a major part of the equation, but it's not the only part of the equation. And that's where I failed because that's all I focused on. So fast forward a little bit, I'm 20 years old, again, through the lens of like, I'm not going to let this stop me from anything. I was snowboarding. I did everything. I always played sports. I was always physical. When you experience something like this and you have the personality that I have from birth, right? Like you've got to do something that scares you a little bit just so you feel alive some days. And so like my rush threshold is way too high, and I've learned to ratchet that back because some things are not worth risking your life or limb for. But I'm snowboarding and I go down and I re-broke my arm, and I knew it immediately, right? It was a compound fracture, and I was in Southern California. My family wasn't there. I had very few friends that really understood the whole thing. And so we get to the hospital and I take care of everything. I'm basically with no medications because I had to have clarity of thought. I applied the mental toughness, right, to push through the pain so that I could hopefully recover and heal. But what that translated to was a 10-month period with my arm hanging by my side broken. Because there were 7 surgeons that were afraid to touch me, refused to touch me because of medical malpractice. And every attempt that they had to recover me, which I told them wouldn't work because it was based on the normal anatomy of an arm, right? They tried applying it to my stuff, right? So we did Sarmiento pressure casts and all these different things that of course didn't work, right? Bone stimulation, nothing worked. Well, what happened is my narrative, the world had bought into. So now all of a sudden I'm in one of the most vulnerable places I had ever experienced in my really aware, like becoming an adult state, and nobody was there for me because I created the narrative that I didn't need help. And I didn't have the courage at the time to actually ask for it. But it really exposed that I got really good at reading people in that first period of my life. I got really good at learning how to be mentally tough. But what I wasn't good at was actually establishing human connection. Because if I really had established that effectively, people would have been there regardless of what my narrative was.
Right.
So I shifted that next period of my life towards vulnerability and authenticity and focusing on human connection, right? So I learned this experience through this piece. And so I shifted and I immediately started to bring down that exterior crusty wall that I had built for myself and really tried to like find ways to connect on a deep and meaningful way. And that led me and served me very, very well for the next period of my life, about another 10 to 13 years. And then I started having some other health issues. And I had cognitive dysfunction and brain fog, and my energy was I was unbelievably lethargic. It took me a few years to figure it out, and multiple specialists who all told me I was perfectly healthy. And then we finally landed on it, which was a blessing. But we learned that I have a very rare and extreme case of growth hormone deficiency, likely caused by the number of head injuries I've had, right? Because I've had a number of concussions, some that were caused by the original accident, others just because, again, I told you my rush threshold's up here and I did a lot of stupid stuff.
Sure.
But what we ultimately found out was like I had one of the most extreme cases there was, and we started supplementing, and it took about another year to get all that dialed in. But what I experienced in that period of time is I started to experience emotion in a way that I never had. My wife always joked, she's like, you don't feel anything. And inside I would like fight that narrative and be like, no, I feel like, because I knew what I was feeling, but externally it didn't necessarily always manifest. But it turns out she was right. I wasn't feeling to the full degree. So I remember laying on the couch with my daughter a few years back, and she put her arm around my neck, turned back and gave me a kiss after we'd just been playing, like just laughing and playing so much fun for like 25 minutes. And she said, I love you, Daddy. And I was brought to tears out of pure joy in a way that I had never experienced before. And if I experienced pure joy that way, and I'd never experienced it before, it made me start to question, well, what about pain, sorrow, despair, fear? Like, what about the entire spectrum of emotions? And so what I started to unpack and discover is that when I shut off physical pain, I shut off emotional pain.
Wow.
It also made me realize that human connection without emotion isn't really human connection. So that prior period that I just committed to human connection, I did it from a textbook perspective. I had mastered the art of connecting, but it was tactical. It wasn't actually empathetically connecting. So I always used to coach from a perspective of sympathy. I could see the emotion, I could read the emotion, I could identify the emotion, I could talk to them about emotion, but all of my narrative was focused on how do you think about that? It was all up here. And what I started to change then in my own narrative and the way that I even coached was understanding in the appropriate scenario when to ask, what do you think about that? But also understanding from an empathetic perspective, how do you feel about that? Because now all of a sudden I was having this profound observation and understanding and the full spectrum of emotions, which made me realize I'd been boxed in for this whole period of time. Now I could actually connect on a place of empathy, right? And so what I now believe is that mental toughness and intellect and our intellectual narratives are unbelievably important, but they only get you so far. Our emotional narratives, our feelings, our understanding of the world are incredibly important. They only get you so far. Those that reach true peak potential, those that really maximize their performance in life, are the ones that understand the intellect and the emotion, the mindset and the heart set, and how to balance and regulate between the two. Because both narratives can lie to us. Both narratives can tell us the truth. We need to be able to be aware so we can be intentional which one to trust in the moment.
Wow. Beautiful. I mean, that is so incredibly powerful. Thank you so much for sharing that and sharing the story and the context around it. It's I look back on myself and how I show up emotionally or with a lack of emotion. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you just a quick funny story. Not so funny, but it was telling at the time when right before my wife and I were married. We had met with a religious leader one of which was going to be marrying us. And that religious leader said to me that I'm like a stone wall. And it was just one of those comments. And it hit me at the time, but it took a while for it to really sink in. But basically what he was saying was, I'm not expressing the emotional intelligence or emotions that he would typically see. And that's not an easy thing to hear.
No, it's not.
Yeah, but it's interesting when that happens, and what you've experienced is sometimes it takes that feedback, and I'm sure you were getting feedback from others as well that are in your inner circle.
Oh yeah.
But it takes that feedback for us to go through that process of self-discovery and learn how can I attach to more emotion, right? How can I get more balance there?
That's right.
Yeah.
You're spot on though. And my wife is a bleeding heart. Like she wears her heart on her sleeve. She's extremely emotional, right? And so it's always been like two sides of a different coin in our relationship. It's just like she's always been so to the extreme. Like she could watch commercials and start crying. We'll drive by roadkill and she'll start crying. She's to the other extreme of me. And so when she used to say I didn't feel, like, it didn't connect. But I'll tell you that observation, that discovery, that ability to then start to bring emotion and feeling back in, because I feel very deeply now. I've actually been on the verge of tears more times in the last few years than at any point in my life. I've cried more times. And by the way, I've never had any label on men crying. I actually think it's an extremely powerful thing. I just never expressed emotion that way. So now that I am, it's odd, but I will tell you, it's not only changed the way I approach my coaching, right, and my philosophies on life and the way I show up, it has deeply changed my relationship with my wife and my kids into a very powerful way, right, where we connect on a level that I've not been able to connect with any of them up until this point. And I truly can understand different emotions, identify them with our kids, unpack them, have conversations. I wouldn't have been capable of that 10 years ago, right? And it's the same thing with my wife. Like, when I see that emotion where I used to probably be cold and reserved or shut off in certain ways, I now can identify, like, okay, I understand what that's like to feel what she's feeling right now. And I can be a better support for my wife. So I'm the man I am today, to your point, often because of my wife and the challenges that she's put on me in our life. And I often talk about, like, whatever I talk about externally, right? These observations, these clarity moments, these observations I have on human behavior in life and what I apply in coaching, 50% of that's me. The other 50% of that's my wife. And she allows me to see things that I don't see about myself and about others. And so what gets communicated externally is really a combination of our partnership.
That's fantastic. And I have no doubt that you share that with her, so she's well aware.
Yep. Yep.
That's fantastic. So there's a quote by Viktor Frankl, the author of Man's Search for Meaning. Have you read that book?
A long time ago, but yes, I have.
Okay, so Viktor Frankl said that between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom.
That's right.
When you hear that quote, what does it mean to you?
It means everything. It means everything. Every part of my philosophy is attached to that quote. Right. If you've done research on me, again, you'll know, like, I'm a big believer that, and this is one of the greatest lessons my dad ever taught me, that in life, no matter what, never fails, always, guaranteed, we have a minimum of two choices. They both might be horrible choices, right? You might be held up at gunpoint and your choice is to decide, do I get shot or hand over my wallet? They both suck, but it's still your choice. And the quicker that we begin to own our choices, the better we are able to understand growth opportunities and lessons that we can extract from those choices. And that it's also okay to pivot and change those choices. So when I hear that choice, right, like the gap in that space, as he describes it, it really is our opportunity, right? And so the core of my philosophies, right, really base around awareness and intentionality. But again, we talk about this concept of embracing pain to avoid suffering. It's all littered into that quote. Right? Because every time we talk about this idea of embracing pain to avoid suffering, it's a choice, right? So we can choose to embrace the pain of hitting the gym for 30 minutes a day to avoid the suffering of aches and pains of a sedentary lifestyle. We can choose to embrace the pain of firing our top salesperson as a business owner to avoid the suffering of stagnant growth, losing all of our other top talent because they're the biggest cancer in our culture. We can choose to have those difficult conversations with our spouse to avoid the suffering of a loveless marriage that might end up in divorce when you really want to be with that person, or alternatively, being stuck in a marriage when you really want divorce. It's these moments that really give us the ability to choose where we want to go. And I believe that we all must choose our pain, or our suffering will choose us. So that's everything in that quote.
Wow, great way to state it. So you have touched on mindset multiple times in this conversation. And I remember one of the seminal books that I wrote, I wish, that I read on mindset was actually the book called Mindset by Carol Dweck.
Love that
Stanford, book. Oh, incredible. Stanford psychologist. And in that book, as you know, since you've read it, Carol talks about really the two different types of mindsets, right? She talks about a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. So you've touched on this, but could you share with us how mindset plays a role in your life and also in the work that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to quickly turn around for a second because mindset is actually on that stack of books right there. I was very intentional with the books that I chose behind me. And that is one of my favorite books of all time. I completely buy into the fixed versus the growth mindset. And so how has it played a role in my life? Again, it comes back to choices, right? And perspective. And so, the way she outlines it is in a fixed mindset, right? We're born with everything we're ever going to be given. And so all of the outcomes of our life, the decisions, the feedback that we get is commentary on who we are versus the things we do. And it seems to, again, like around the comment I made even on the awareness intentionality, it seems like life is happening to us and it's fate. And so all the feedback goes to our core on who we are, right? So it becomes shaming, it becomes self-worth issues, it becomes all these other things. The growth mindset says that you're born with a certain set of gifts and tools, and we have the ability to hone those, craft those, refine those, and add to them or subtract from them over time. And so why that book resonated so deeply with me is I feel like that's what I've done my whole life, right? Is recognize that I was born with a certain set of gifts. I was given all these different scenarios in my life to reflect on and recognize that, like, it doesn't mean it has to define me. It doesn't mean I have to be stuck. It doesn't mean it's who I am, right? When I look at my arm, it's not who I am. It's a part of me. It's a part of my story, but it's not who I am, right? There's a lot of people who are victims of trauma, right? Physically, emotionally, spiritually, that it becomes a part of their identity. Right. It becomes who they are. Right. And for me, it was something that happened to me. Yes, it's a part of my story, but who I am can be strengthened or absolutely sacrificed based on the choice I make on how I'm going to allow that injury, those accidents, those experiences to define me or contribute to my growth. And so I think I've always just chosen that other side because maybe I was born with rose-colored glasses, right? I like to see the light in everything. And so when these things happen, that does not mean, by the way, that I've not suffered. That does not mean, by the way, that I've never had depression. That does not mean, by the way, that anxiety doesn't strike me or I don't get stuck, or in those moments of absolute despair, I feel like there's no chance at living or growing or moving through life. Like, we all experience that. But what I've learned, right, and I'm actually going to quote a movie, and it's going to be cheesy, but it's one of my favorite quotes. It's from the Rocky Balboa movie. Right? When he's talking to his son and he says, right, life's not all sunshine and rainbows. It'll knock you to your knees and keep you there if you let it. Right? But life's not about how hard you get or can hit. Life's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. How much you can take and keep moving forward. That's how winning is done. And when I look at my life, I get chills every time I say that quote. I literally have goosebumps all over my body as we say that, because I connected so deeply on that quote because I believe that I've experienced the amount of pain that I have to be able to reduce the amount of suffering in the lives of others. I believe that to my core, that the experiences I have been through, as difficult as they were in the moment, I always become stronger by my ability to stand back up one more time than I've been knocked back down. And I'm going to continue to do that until the day I am no longer on this planet. And I'm going to continue to evolve and I'm going to continue to refine. I'm on Brian Bogert version 72 or something at this moment, because the reality of it is there is no final destination. It's a constant evolution of self. And it's a constant evolution of figuring out how do we add more into our lives, more growth into our lives. And when we do that, right, we can truly touch our highest level of consciousness and our ability to really have impact on this world and become who we are. So our light can shine to the world. I believe that to my core. And it's been tested time and time again. So that book is absolutely critical. But I will tell you that there are patterns in my own life that book allowed me to become aware of and change the way I parent. When I think about the language that I use with my children, right? Often, right? And this is one of the greatest parts. There's a whole section in the book. So anybody who's listening, if all you do is reference this section of the book, you'll get tremendous value. But it's for parents, teachers, and coaches. Mm-hmm. And it talks about the importance of the language that we choose, right? And so a great example, fixed mindset might be your kid takes a test and it's, oh my gosh, like, I'm so happy you got an A. You're so smart. What the kid hears in that is, oh, geez, if I don't continue to get A's, they're not going to think I'm smart anymore. Instead, on a growth mindset language, you say, oh my gosh, like I am so proud of you. You worked your butt off. You studied, you really committed yourself to this. You focused on all the things that you needed to do. And I'm really proud of the work that you put in regardless of the outcome. You happen to get an A, awesome. But what I care most about is your work and the process versus the outcome, right? So often in my life, and this isn't towards my parents or teachers or anything, but how often do we measure the outcome versus the process and the work that's put into wherever we're going to go?
Too often.
Almost always, right? Think about it even at work. Like you could get a subjective, quick response from a boss on a horrible outcome, and little do they know you maybe have committed 6 weeks of your life to this, and they dismiss it in 10 seconds.
Yeah.
Like that deflates people's worth and sense of like commitment towards the process every single day. But what, I believe is that consistency is key. Relentless consistency unlocks. And so it really is about the process and those little things that compound over time. And it's changed the way I talk to my kids to the point that like, I really don't care the outcome if I know they've given everything they've got. I don't care, right? And so if they get a bad review at school, but I know they've been working their butts off, you know what? You're working hard, right? If you're not working, that's a whole different deal. Right. If you're not putting all of yourself into this and you still get a bad outcome, I'm going to then still focus on your work ethic. Like, how hard did you commit to the process? That's been my life. So that's why I so deeply connect to the book.
Yeah. Well, I'm right there with you. I mean, such incredible lessons have come out of that book. And, as I mentioned, it is definitely a seminal piece of work and one in which that I would recommend to anyone and everyone that's listening
Likewise.
Or watching. Excellent. So I want to talk about where we are in this current time. So in light of COVID-19, what are you doing differently today to adapt and thrive? And while you unpack that a bit, could you also tell us what's working well for you and what advice would you have for other business leaders?
Yeah. So, I'm going to start with the advice piece, and then I'm going to show you why I'm going to give that advice. I think that for business leaders in particular, the amount of friction that exists to getting to phenomenal people across the globe is less than at any other point in history, including 6 months ago. And so what's happened, how I pivoted, and then I'm going to come back and explain why I believe that, but that's what I wanted to start with. We have more opportunity to build quality relationships and have collective impact right now than we've ever had. What happened when COVID hit for me, right, is I had a bunch of live stages get canceled. And to my own detriment, I devalued the value of podcasts and different types of connections and free stages and virtual type stages. I'd only done a handful of podcasts pre-COVID. Right. And I was working off of my normal webcam on my computer, like things were different. And again, you and I were chatting about this quickly before we started recording this morning, right? I'm so big on reading people that even a 27-inch iMac screen wasn't translating the micro expressions, body language, and all of those things as effectively as in person. And so I looked at, okay, so if live stages go away, if my live coaching goes away, how do I pivot in a way that I can still have as good or greater impact? And so I shifted to this idea of podcasting. Now I actively sought out, I want to say somewhere between 10 and 12 and landed most of them, which was cool, right? Built some really quality relationships, but I just showed up, and the lens with which I'm viewing the world right now, the only three things I'm focused on are relationships, value, and impact. So in each one of those scenarios, I showed up and did just that, right? I wanted to understand, I'm being given a gift to be on their show. How do I understand what their objectives are, determine if and how I can help, connect them with other like minds to help them build their show, add value to their audience? And what just magically happened through my ability to connect people, because that's something I've always focused on, is all of a sudden it was like my connection abilities went on steroids, because I could bring 3 or 4 or 5 guests to a podcast host, and all of a sudden they open up a bunch of doors for me. which typically doesn't happen, by the way. Like in the traditional world, I'll make introductions and almost nothing comes back. And I'm okay with that because I'm doing it to help the other people. But in this case, it's like I show up on these formats, I make some introductions, I'm hopefully adding values in what I'm doing. Well, in 4 months, I don't say this to impress, I say it to impress on the point. I've now been on over 80 podcasts.
Nice.
Like I'm recording multiple a day, right? In a lot of these cases, it's been insane. And I've been able to redefine my belief on what our reach really is. I've been on 4 that are based out of the UK, 2 based in India. I'm working with somebody right now to get into Australia. And what's resulted as a result of it is I legitimately have established business collaborations and opportunities with people in the UK, in Australia, across the globe, across our country, in a way that I never would have been able to talk to people. And so because we're sitting here in this format, right, I told you I invested in the technology. So I wanted to set up this virtual studio. I wanted to have good quality, sound, lighting, and image. I wanted people to see me really clearly. And I tested that for a little while on my 27-inch screen, and it wasn't working the same as I wanted it to. So I literally got a virtual streaming cart where the DSLR and the lens and everything stays mounted to it, and you're on a 50-inch TV right now. Well, now I can see the micro expressions. I can see the emotion. I can see the body language in a way that we weren't talking about. When you talked about, you were getting a little teary-eyed when I talked about that impact on my parents, I saw that. I couldn't have seen that on a screen. I saw your eyes and the redness go around your eyes. I wouldn't have been able to see that on a smaller format. And so in 4 months, I think that depending on our energy levels, ability to connect, and those types of things, I do believe that we can compress anywhere between 1.5 to 3 times the amount of new introductions to quality people to vet out who wants to remain in my circle and who am I going to help than we could in the traditional world. Right? The friction is different because how do we used to get together with people? Sometimes it'd be a phone call, but often it'd be a coffee or a lunch or a dinner or a drink, right? And you're commuting and you're changing. You can literally compress 1.5 to 3 times the number of meetings into a particular day, which isn't sustainable long term. I mean, this isn't going to exist long term. At some point, there's going to be some hybrid model. But while it exists, I'm trying to double down on this. Yeah. Because I've had more quality conversations with some of the most interesting people I've ever met in my entire life in the last 4 months. And that's not just by coincidence. That's because good people breed good people. And when your reach can literally be global at this moment, because everybody is now used to this format, which they weren't 6 months ago, right? Now we have the ability to change the way we actually view this. What we used to believe was a global economy, I don't actually think was. I think we're now actually operating in a global economy. Oh, yeah. We now have access to people that we wouldn't have had access to before, and more people are working in a remote capacity. So decision makers, people that you want to get to, are more apt to have a conversation. Because what's the risk? It's a 30-minute Zoom call or a 15-minute Zoom call. And then if you show up and you focus on relationships, value, and impact, guess what? Those things translate to more. So the business owners, that's why I started with that. I am a big believer that when this thing started, there was a lot of narratives out there saying, if you're not smarter, faster, investing in yourself, growing your business during this time, then shame on you, right? And I hated that narrative because it happened, knocked everybody out of autopilot, and we needed to process and grieve the change of life that was happening, the loss of life that was happening all around us early in this whole experience. And so I actually went completely against that in the very beginning, where it was like, give yourself the ability to process, right? Make sure that you're strong, take toll on those things that are additive in your life, take toll on those things that are not. But now I'm in a place 6 months into this thing where it's like, okay, people are still hurting, they're still suffering. And for those people, find a way to process and heal so that you can start to move forward. Many have already done that piece. So now we're in a position where we have opportunity in front of us in a way that I don't think we've ever had. And so I think we can double down on that.
Yeah, I am right there with you. It's this has truly created an incredible amount of opportunity for us if we're looking at it correctly, right. If we're going into it with eyes wide open. And like our connection here today, that may or may not have happened, probably would not have happened had it not been for the current state.
It probably wouldn't have happened. I mean, I can almost guarantee you it wouldn't have happened.
Right. I mean, we travel in different circles, right? We're in different geographic areas, but it has been a remarkable opportunity to bring good people together. And just like you said, as you look at serving others, good attracts good, right? Like attracts like. And that's why I'm so glad we're having this conversation. And I know I've been blessed with some incredible people that have appeared on this show, like you. And likewise, I've been on other podcasts. And it really is an amazing thing. And I love the ability to connect this way and look for ways to be of service to one another and support one another. A couple of the things I'd like to touch on before we wrap up. And one of those, you mentioned Mindset being an impactful book, but what are 1 to 2 books that have had a significant effect on your outlook on life, excluding Mindset?
Yeah. So another one that I actually have up here, because I'm a part of a men's group that's actually talking about it right now, and it's the third time I've read it. This is unbelievably powerful. Dare to Lead by Brene Brown. When I talked about my emotions and how they were confined, what I also realized I was confined in some different ways. And what I didn't realize, again, until I started experiencing emotion, is that shame played a pretty big role in my life. Brene Brown's one of the most prolific shame researchers, experts, and her ability to communicate that out into the world is profound. And so she is a gift in my life. What's interesting, and the reason I couldn't identify shame, is it's the ultimate wolf in sheep's clothing, right? And it hides itself and masks itself as all these other emotions. The majority of shame sits in the you're not good enough, you're not worthy. And although I've had moments in my life where I felt that, that's not been my primary narrative. And so that's why I didn't really identify it as shame. But through Brené's work, what she outlined for me is the other narrative to shame, right? Is when you show up, you shut down that first one and you go to into the arena and you're ready to go to battle. It's who do you think you are? The reality of it is that's where I was bit. I've done a lot of cool stuff in my life that I still haven't ever talked about publicly. And the interesting thing about that is every time I've done something meaningful or big or like audacious in my life, I've felt the need to apologize for it. And that's that other talk track, like, who do you think you are? So it checked me, right? And it checked me and it confined me in this box. So that's one of the most transformative books I've ever read because it freed me from shame. Not that shame doesn't exist in my life anymore. It will always exist in my life in some capacity. But because I'm now aware of it, when I feel the emotional trigger bubble up, I can pause and choose a different path and understand what the root of that emotion actually is. It's not fear, it's not guilt, right? It's shame. And that can be very damaging. So that's one. I think the other one, I'll share one more and I won't go as long on that topic, but it's Grit by Angela Duckworth.
Excellent.
I think those 3 books are 3 of my favorite of all time. I read about a book a week and have for about 7 or 8 years. So I've got a long list of ones I like, but those 3 always come to the top.
Yeah. Well, I have all 3 of them on the shelf right over here. Excellent, excellent choices. So what are you reading right now? Since you read a book a week, what are you in the middle of?
That is a great question because I'm now drawing a blank as soon as you ask me that. I'm actively reading Dare to Lead again as we speak. I'm actually reading, I'm listening to another thing by Brene Brown, which is The Power of Vulnerability. And I just actually got done reading, so I need to add another one to my list. I'm looking at the title right now. It's Leadership Begins with Motivation, and it's by a friend of mine, Dr. Danny Brazel. And it's just a really phenomenal book. It's a bunch of stories and colloquialisms on concepts around leadership. And many of the stories are ones that a lot of us have heard, but he packages and tells the stories in such a way that they're like really actionable. And so it just got released on Amazon a couple of months ago and I've known him. So he's like, hey, would you read it? I rarely put like eyes to an actual book. I listen because I consume better that way. Okay. I read his book in just under 2 hours on a plane, couldn't put it down. I was like, oh, I'll crack the book. It was that good. I just finished it like 2 weeks ago. So
good. I will check that one out as well. Thank you for the recommendation on it. So very briefly, I want to touch on mentors. So we know that mentors can help shape our lives and our careers. Who are 1 to 2 mentors, either living or dead, who've inspired you, and how have they impacted your life and how you show up to the world?
Yeah, it's a great question. One that I always have to comment on, her name is Sue Glaw. She was the director of community relations for Blue Cross Blue Shield here in Arizona for her life. I mean, she's incredible. She's one of those people that never gets or wants the credit, but has been involved in almost everything meaningful that's happened in Phoenix over the last 40 or 50 years. Wow. Just She knows everybody. She's involved in every community aspect. She is just dialed, and she's one of those that's quick to trust. But if you burn her, like, you're always on the blacklist. And so I've been really fortunate to, like, never. She's opened up doors for me in my life, given me perspective and lessons that are just meaningful. And she introduced me to an individual by the name of Bill Shover, who, again, was one of those same types of guys. And the reason I shared her is because I wouldn't have known him without her. And he shared a quote with me, which I don't think was original to him. In fact, I've heard it other times, but it was the first time I'd heard it. And he said, there's no limit to what one can accomplish as long as they care not who get the credit. And so that was like a really, really profound thing for me, because I met them in my early 20s and had a lot of respect for both of them. And, Sue Glaw is one of those mentors that if somebody dropped her name, I'm going to listen. Right. And immediately it's like, I'm going to just serve it forward like she does. So that's been really powerful. A more recent mentor in my life, which I'm getting a lot of growth from, is a guy by the name of David Meltzer. And many people listening to this might know, he and I shared a virtual stage during COVID. We ended up connecting. We both share a mission to impact 1 billion lives. And it's quickly escalated into, I'm just really drawn to him and his philosophies. We're very aligned on a lot of stuff. He's a little further along than I am, just in terms of age, wisdom, experience on all things. And he's become quickly a mentor in my life. Really just focusing on, again, building upon a lot of the philosophies and concepts that are in my life. He's living it. And so it's a great way to see how I can continue to do that over the course of the next 25 to 30 years.
Beautiful. Well, David Meltzer was an amazing guest on this show and shared a tremendous amount of his wisdom and insights. And another book for everyone to go out and make sure that you read is Connected to Goodness.
Yep.
It is an excellent book. So thank you for sharing your mentors, how they've inspired you and how they've impacted your life. And what message would you like to leave our audience with?
I believe that we all have the ability to live well beyond the limits that the world has placed on us and the limits that we place on ourselves. And it's hard to see that or feel that all of the time. And certainly we don't have those breakthrough moments every minute of every day, right? They're moments in our lives that we then look back on and remember, oh, I did that. So in this time of despair, in this time of sorrow, in this time of pain for so many people, I really would encourage folks to just become very, very aware on the things that are additive in their lives and the things that take away from their lives, drain their energy, and then become intentional with how do we start to move forward with those types of items. Because the more you lean into those things that fill your energy, the more you get to lean into your most authentic self, the more you're honoring who you are at the core. And when you honor who you are at the core, that's when you start to break free of a lot of those limits that the world has placed on us. I believe that should is a shame-based word. It immediately implies that whatever we're doing is not good enough. And so do not listen to the word should in your life. Reframe it and ask, what could I do? What would I do differently? What could the opportunities be? What would the opportunities have been if I did something different? Change the language, become aware, become intentional, become who you already are, and you truly can live with no limits.
Remarkable. So before I ask my final question to you, where can we connect with you?
Yep. You can find me on pretty much all social media platforms at Bogert Brian. You can find me at my website, brianbogert.com. And there is a good platform with a lot of the content that I put out. 99.9999% of those billion people that I'm going to impact will never pay me $1. I know that. I'm very clear on that. And so I produce a lot of free content just to add value into people's lives. And one of those free pieces of content that's not on my website, but I know will add value to anybody listening, go to nolimitprelude.com. There's a free download on some of the core philosophies in our coaching to really give you some of the questions to prompt to yourself, to discover purpose, to get clear on who you are, and really start to move forward towards a life of no limits.
Excellent. Well, we will make sure that we link to each of those in our show notes. So here is my final question to you. What is one of the most valuable lessons that you've learned from your coaching work that you didn't expect, but has had a significant impact on you personally?
What you see on the outside is not always what's actually happening. I'm blessed in the fact that I get to work with a lot of high performing individuals who earn multiple six figures, often seven figures. And on the outside, it looks like they've got it all figured out, right? They're happy. They have material things. They have success. They might have beautiful family pictures. Their highlight reels on social media might just show this phenomenal life. But everybody experiences emotion. Everybody has blocks. Everybody has emotional triggers and behavioral patterns that keep them stuck in a self-defeating pattern that doesn't allow them to truly become unbridled and live that no limits life in alignment that we've talked about. And so I would just really encourage people in this world where comparison is so real to not focus on what is happening in other people's lives. Everything begins and ends with you. And so the more we start to understand that, the more we can begin with the who, the what will be a manifestation of it. But again, that's not to suggest that all these people who are successful have miserable lives. That's not what I'm saying. But the reality of it is I am a coach and I have multiple coaches in my life to help me see blind spots. I have a Reiki energy healer I work with. I have a meditation coach. I have 2 different business coaches that I work with as a coach, right? We've got a marriage counselor that we both see independently. I am all for getting outside perspectives to help getting more clarity on who I am, because I know I'm the only one that I can control. And so that's what I've learned through coaching. I think these were things I believed, but after you work with enough people and get to see them potentially in their most vulnerable place as you take them on that intrinsic journey and they start to see and feel things that maybe they were unaware of before, when you see that, and then the transformation that comes after it, everybody can do it, but we're all in different places and we just have to recognize it begins and ends with us.
So true. Amazing. What a fantastic conversation. Thank you, Brian, so much for being here, for showing up your true, authentic self, for sharing of your knowledge, sharing of your wisdom and insights, and for all of you out there watching, gosh, make sure that you check out this gentleman's work. And again, we'll go ahead and link to all of the different areas that you mentioned in the show notes and check them out. And thank you so much. I'm grateful for you being here today.
Yeah, Jay, thank you. You know, you've built a platform to be able to bring inspiration, perspective, all of these things into people's lives by allowing them to learn from other people's stories. And so without you doing that, without you taking that initiative, we wouldn't have had this opportunity today. So thank you. It was a true pleasure to be with you.
Absolutely. Well, count me as one of the 1 billion that you have impacted, and keep doing it. And for the rest of you, thank you very much for watching. And if you found value in this episode, you know what to do. Go ahead and like and share. And please subscribe to this channel. And until next time, stay healthy and optimistic. Keep learning and growing. And remember that transformative change in your life and business always begins with you, and nothing happens until you take action. And we'll see you on the next episode of Business Minds Coffee Chat. Take care.